And one of the things that I learned, which you can learn very easily from telling jokes, especially good ones, is who is the smartest person in the room, because they're the person who laughs first. And I would use that to cheat the system of classism, racism, to figure out who it was that was the most immediate person. By having that joke, the most accessible joke available, I would be able to determine who would potentially be my allies based on psychology and philosophy, because they would be people who I could explain things to and would arrive first. And therefore, the ability to gain allies would then wind up being the most prevalent towards influencing them, because I would be able to spend the least amount of efforts to get an ally within them. And years later, when I went back to school in secret, I didn't have a lot of money. And so a way that I solved having good times on Friday nights was that because I was older, but still a freshman in the dorms, because I went to another school with a complete restart at 24, I would have all the exchange students come over and we'd have a potluck dinner where the goal was that you would go buy all the groceries that you need in order to cook a dish from your culture and make that for other people. And, so I was making stuff that was like, Amish person's delight, stuff that's like knockoff spaghettis and stuff like that. And got a chance to eat, bibimbap and Korean pancakes and, things from France and Italy and Spain and just all sorts of places from around the globe, because we had a very diverse selection of exchange students. And as we'd sit around the dinner table, the Koreans would tell me how they were being prejudicially targeted by the Japanese, the Chinese, and the Taiwanese people there. And I'd be like, why? Like, this doesn't make any fucking sense. How are you like, don't you guys all get along? Why, like, what on fucking earth could they possibly find wrong with you? And they're like, they just know we look different, so they beat us up or they chastise us. And I threw out one of the dinners that we had. There was a really nice Korean girl named Minty and another guy named Junso who were really flirting with each other. And they were bullied by the other regional Asian people. And so what came to happen was the other regional Asian people had told other Koreans who were like much more puritanical in their approach, but not like religiously so, just like that's, they're for all the porn they have, they're very conservative culture. And the presence of it was that these folks came to my party and they started bullying Minty because she was interested in Junso and she'd just broken up with her boyfriend because he was back in Korea. She couldn't see him for a year. And she was like halfway through the year and was like, if you're really unhappy with me, like I can't fix that. I can't come home. I'm like here for school, like, so we should just break up. And they were like, you're such a whore. You're a harlot. How dare you be looking at another person? And I was like, oh, I know this. I remember this from church. You're like church girls, just without the Jesus. I got that. Get the fuck out of my house. Don't you dare treat her like that. I don't want to fucking hear it. They made her cry. And I was like, I'm going to tell you right now, you have about 6 seconds to pack all your shit up and get the fuck out of my house. You didn't even bring any food to a potluck dinner. What are you even doing here? Like you're completely
What were they
in the
doing
wrong
there?
here.
Like, did they get invited?
They got invited. Yeah. They were like somebody's plus one, except it was plus five. And when they saw me stick up for her, they were like, we don't want anything to do with you. And I'm like, you're someone who's getting fired saying, no, I quit. Like, please, if I need to drag you out of here, I will lay hands on you, because she's such a sweet girl. She couldn't hurt anybody and would only bring joy to other people at any opportunity that she could have, even if it would cost her everything. So for you to criticize her for that, not only do you not know who she is, but you're missing the opportunity by being cruel to her. And
Sounds like
so,
Twitter.
yeah. Uh it's really funny because like it showed me that was the first time that I ever really saw that people on another side of the planet also had this ridiculous bargaining system with the pools that they wanted to push people into in order to be able to collate the data on them and understand who they were. And like Koreans are, they're just Koreans, they're just basically regular ass people. But because of their tumultuous history, in a lot of ways, they are treated the same way that Black people are treated here.
I want to rehash because you said so much. So you went through all these different experiences, and basically you are kind of gaining more and more awareness over time of just like these racial boundaries, the traumas that you've endured, how your traumas are related to other people's traumas in similar ways, and how it seems like you were kind of coming to an understanding that um, there are different kinds of solutions, and you were kind of experimenting with those or coping mechanisms, perhaps you could say, or ways of like being after experiencing these traumas that you were like kind of like learning about and testing out. And so I guess one question I have is, what are your views now? Okay, because it sounds like all of these experiences have shaped your present views on the subject of race and racism. So I guess I want you to tell me a little bit about where all of these experiences kind of left you in terms of contemplating that subject matter.
Well, the last note, I guess, is what I was leading into, which I can be very, very brief about. But the happiest day that I had in my entire life was when I arrived in San Francisco to go work that job. And I didn't know where I was going, and I was in the Mission, which is a deeply Hispanic part of San Francisco. And there's a skate park there down off of a street called Potrero. And the skate park had Black, white, Hispanic, Asian kids, just everybody there skating together, having a good time. And the signs around the fences were no adults allowed without children present. So if you didn't have kids that were going to play in the park, you could not be in the park. That was how they solved that. And I saw these kids crossing the street on their skateboards, and I had never seen in my life, in any of the places that I ever lived, Black kids who were allowed to skateboard. If they tried, they'd get beat down by the white kids. If they tried, they'd have their boards snapped. They'd get beat up. And it made me cry because I just saw these happy kids walking down the street, getting ready to go into this park, watched them go in, and they didn't have a care in the world. And that's kind of what I fight desperately for now, because in a lot of ways, the experiences that I've had shape me, have taught me that culture is sort of systemically a lie, that it's the things that we rely on most readily to help us navigate the world right in front of us, but that there are a lot other things that we are not aware of, that we do not have to deal with, that only through seeking knowledge by talking to other people can we both see how others may have solved it, or how they have not yet solved it and need our help. And that ultimately I've come to the conclusion that we are just one species, and that the project of race is a frivolous one, not because it's not important to note how important it is, but that if we are going to go for equality, then we must consider ourselves one of all of each other.
The decision making part, I don't think anyone questions um, what can happen. It's just like, is that people's desire? Is that what people want? I think generation after generation, the definitive answer is no, or at least not the people in power. And I don't think the majority of people in this country, to be honest, if they're being honest with themselves.
I think that the cruelest thing that you can do is not believe in other people. The very cruelest thing you can do is not believe in the potential of other people, and it doesn't really matter.
Well, potential is that's not what I'm not talking about potential, right? Like,
But I believe we are, specifically because we're
well,
talking
I
about the
wasn't.
possibility. Well, shifting the context of it in order to be able to speak to whether or not they will try if given a better ramp or better ladder, a better stairway, a better accessibility option. Will they accept that? And I think in a lot of ways, from the things that I've seen, that the most miserable people only want to let the right ones in. And they only want to let the right ones in because they don't have any agency to determine who they are. So they go with the most frivolous of benchmarks by which to determine other people's worth. And that actually is a huge cry for help. And so it isn't helping them, getting them adjusted, that they then choose diplomacy. And that's true of all people categorically worldwide. People who are doing well like to share. People who are doing awful don't.
All right, so hang on. Let's pause right there. All right. So the issue is, Spence, and I find that I deal with this issue a lot in recent times, which I think is a good thing, but let's have you grapple with it. So
Okay.
you know, the issue is you're kind of putting that out there as if it's like a universal kind of property, and that's not correct. Like, the context matters greatly, and that's why you're speaking so generally about it right now, because like when you impose context into it, like some of these principles don't necessarily hold. And so it's just like in math, right? Like there's absolute properties in math, and then there's ones that work a lot of the time, right? Or like most of the time, or like, sometimes they're context specific and there's exceptions, right? Or like this or that. And like in the race context, there's a lot of stuff like that. It's quite complicated. And so I think, um, while I don't disagree with anything you've said, in terms of like the fact that we're all one human family, one human species. I mean, I think that's been pretty much definitively proven at this point. We also have the whole history of how the categories of race were created to know that it's nothing to do with having different categories of humans. These were constructed specifically for the purpose of subjugating humans into lower classes of humans and to
Yep.
maintain generational power, which has worked. So
Yep.
we really have all of that knowledge. The question is, and what we're just now, after generations of acceptance of a tyrannical racial hierarchy, what we're just now starting to grapple with is, should we actually do something to try to unravel it and return, or perhaps for the very first time, um, to a world where we look at each other as human beings the way that we actually are, the way that empowered you when you shed your painted illusory mask that you were wearing. It's empowering to do that, and that's kind of, in my view, what we need to do with the issue of races. We need to empower people and allow them a chance to at least first communicate about it, and then two, make a decision about whether they want to actually actively, because that's what it requires, do something to create that new type of world that, at least in the country of America, has never existed.
And so if we're going to talk about race as something that is a construct, you are absolutely correct. But I have to make it my position that for me, I'm going to approach all solutions as if it must serve everyone, that it must serve those who are being hurt the most. Like, because without that, then it doesn't have the value they might ascribe to it. There's
What's the,
millions of
what's
people
what's
now
your
telling
reasoning
me.
for saying that? What's that connected to, that idea there? That was a little confusing for me to understand where that came from.
So my point is that while I may be generalized and nebulous in my description of we are all one human species, blah blah blah, all that stuff, it goes to say that I find no value in the advice of philosophers unless it has the context of the most raw information about the people whom they are speaking about. So you must consider everyone's position. And so there can be no dalliance around how hard Black people in America are getting hit. You cannot have any dalliance around describing how hard white people who just don't talk about it are being hit, and that the subjugation of one entire culture of people is unacceptable, and that we must find answers to that, because we are one people, because they are our brothers and sisters. We are all connected, whether we like it or not. We're stuck here together. So
Yeah, I
to
mean,
to not
a
to
lot of
not
those
just to
ideas that you're mentioning there are in the poem that I wrote.
and so that's all of that to answer both those questions. What position am I coming in from? And what was my experience to arrive there? And so, in a lot of ways, what I was saying about being considered the realist guy was because I just hang out with anybody. And so I got a chance to really live with Black people who were getting the shit kicked out of them by the system. And I also got to live with white people who were benefiting from it, even though they were a bunch of big pieces of shit themselves. And so somewhere out there, there is the potential message that could thread them all together so they start taking care of themselves, so that we don't have to be the only ones trying. And that's what I've been in search of, was finding a
Can you
philosopher,
repeat
find
that? Can you repeat that last part?
somewhere out there, there exists a message that will thread them all together so they'll take care of themselves, so that we don't have to be the only ones trying.
Who's them?
Just people,
But who's
just people who are
you
on
said
two
them?
sides.
You said them, and then you said we. And it seems like two different groups, but like, so
And
who
again,
are?
it's kind of difficult to navigate, but I'm speaking from the perspective of the they them being just everyone in totality, because everyone's having trouble. Everyone's having
No,
problems.
I get that part, but I'm also not clear about what you meant in general. So like, can you just say it one more time?
So somewhere out there, there exists a message to convince other people to take care of each other, so that we, you and I, people who are willing to stand up and speak, if that lends context to it, don't have to be the only ones trying. So people who are proactive, who do want to stand up and say something, who will stand up when somebody's getting bullied, how you and I interacted, right? That charisma and that ambition to say, hey, actually, you know what? It's a lot easier than you think it is. Just watch my example. That there's a message that can be carried, and that it is the key to a door. And once that door is open, people will be beckoned to go through it, metaphorically speaking. And it's almost
Don't
like
you
trying to,
don't you think that door is kind of already open, and that the issue isn't that it's not open, but that people don't walk through it. I think I don't think that we're waiting for any kind of anything. We've made it. We're making choices, individually and collectively.
yeah. And I think that there's more that can be done there. I think that we've
I mean,
identified the
that's
door.
without a doubt. That's
We're
without a
searching for the
doubt. Yeah.
key. Yeah. And we have an idea of the shape and the structure of it, but the dilemma is that what a religion would do, or what a specific government body would do if it truly served the people and stopped wasting their resources, that something that is for the people, designed by the people to aid the people, could be built in such a shape that it would perpetually provide the key to that door, so that going forward, everyone would be able to unlock it, as long as they came from other people. That it would be some sort of infrastructure that, when passed down, would make sense to making that all make sense, that people would be given agency to choose as they might, and to know singularly that their cruelty came from a cry for help from within. That people who hurt other people would have the awareness then, with the infrastructure in place, to know that the reason they were hurting other people was because they actually needed help. But the infrastructure would also be able to show them all they had to do was ask for help, and it could be so much better. That it would be no problem whatsoever.
What kind of infrastructure do you think we need to develop to create that kind of environment?
Well, it's funny, because I think this description that we already know what the door looks like is the party scene, is the church scene, is the cult scene. I mean, we were talking about it before we got on here, but I spent 5 days working the box office of a festival that turned out to be run by sort of a cult. And the last night that we were there, they did this big kumbaya session where they appropriated Black people music of like Southern early 1900s, late 1900s music that they turned way down, ultra low battery. And then that was like the vibe. And it was very gentle and soothing, but it made me realize that they're basically just singing lullabies to each other as their highest level of energy. And that thrilling moment for them, that moment they were able to sincerely engage to, is the exact same thing as a backyard party with a barbecue, is the exact same thing as the camaraderie you have when you go to a job that you love, is the exact same camaraderie when you go out shopping with your friends for cool outfits that you guys are going to wear on a cruise that you're going on or a trip you're going on together. The togetherness, the celebration of togetherness is what is through that door. And so the message doesn't have a brand. It doesn't have a name. It doesn't have a key that is bespoke to one person who's got the magic to forge it. It is something that we can all forge bespoke to ourselves. It is just a matter of being a master of forging the moment. Can you throw a house party? Can you throw a shindig? Can you invite people over? Because the ability to get people together, to get them to have fun, and to get them to celebrate each other and themselves is the thing that all churches, synagogues, everybody who's doing any sort of infrastructure to get people together is trying to do, to get people to survive by giving them the agency to go back out there and tough it out. And some of them are really good at it, and some of them literally just pass the money to the person who's at the top, and then the rewards are fickle. So that is why I'm here, because you do that. You bring people together. I believe in you because I have seen the depth of your charisma towards this project. You're one of them. You're a Smith. You are an agent of change. And so by doing this repetitively for 4 years, you have stood up for other people in ways that this generation needs. You are a Smith who is training people how to forge new identities through the collective cosmopolitanism that is available to us through the internet. And big clap for you, man.
Would it surprise you, Spence? I appreciate all those words. Thank you so much for seeing me clearly. Like it's something that, to be honest, rarely happens, and so I appreciate that greatly. And
Yeah, man.
it shines through that you've actually engaged with the conversations that I've had, and like you actually took the time to evaluate me, and you're a very perceptive and perceptive person, and so it means a lot coming from you specifically. So I'm great. I'm gracious.
And you see, there's so much racism in America, and it's because white people, like the essence of white fragility, is that they cannot say that they're in trouble, or else they will be stripped of the merit of their agency. Like everyone will consider them a failure, a loser, not worth sleeping with, not worth having kids, not worth having a job. They will be anathema, wiped from the slates if they admit how bad they've got it under the current rule of these dumb pieces of shit in Congress. Like even our biggest champions
I mean,
don't even
what would
fucking.
happen? I don't get it. This is the part that I can't wrap my head around. Like, what do people actually so afraid of? What do people think would occur if they just faced reality, the reality of our situation? Like, why does it have to be so catastrophic? Why does it have to be so apocalyptic? I get people are
Well,
emotional about it and have fears about it, but like in reality, like in the actual reality in which we live and exist, like is there something that people actually fear for real?
yeah,
Like that's
yeah,
real or just
yeah.
okay, what is it?
No, and I can tell you, it's enslavement. What
I
would you
said
need to
that's
do?
real.
No, no, I know. And listen to me. What would you need to do to convince somebody to remain your slave? Because borderline personality disorder, what my mom gave me was the fear that if I ever came close to my own agency, that I would have to self-sabotage. And it took me more than a decade to undo that symptom, where I would destroy my own self at the behest of my parents at just the whistle of them needing me. I would throw everything away to come back home, race home to help my parents out because they had me so trained. And so that what they fear does not exist. but what they fear is real. And so those two things butting up against each other create cognitive dissonance. So they'll just double back to what they already knew. So you'll see people wanting to buck capitalism and they'll go, oh man, I'm not getting paid enough. I can't pay my bills. I can't afford a house. I can't afford the 5 kids that I've had. And I don't have any other access to fun. So like, what should I do? And it's like, well, you've been a good worker. So definitely not asking for a raise because you haven't had one in 6 years. Now's not the time to start. And it's like, wait, you haven't had a raise in 6 years, dude? Aren't you the number one producer for that company? And the dude who owns it just went to Maui where he bought a house. Yeah, okay, something's wrong. Like this is fucked up. And that's the essence of white fragility, is that they are not willing to admit how little agency they have because they are enwrapped in this puritanical capitalist society that keeps them as fodder, as its chattel, as the thing that keeps things going. And so
So they're
what I
afraid of
realized
something that already has come to pass.
indeed, indeed. And they think that you and every other black person in America should stop fucking complaining about slavery, because the secret of that is that they're willing to subject themselves for a little bit of cash and a little bit of notoriety. And they're actually putting themselves in this situation and they don't want to hear it. But on the other side of it, they're never, ever allowed to complain about how much it's actually hurting them. So you're never going to be told just how bad white people have it, except in the fact that they're just bastards all the fucking time. They're just bitches all the fucking time. They're just mean, cruel people. And they take it out on the next easiest thing that they're allowed to, because the powers that be will never stick up for black people if they know that the white people who are beating them down need to do that so they don't fight up. This is a phrase that I sort of focused for myself, but it's definitely, I'm not the one who invented it. But if you can't be rich, or I'm sorry, if you can't be happy when you're broke, you're not going to be happy when you're rich. And in a lot of ways, you would find black culture churning out fun in order to be able to survive, because that is the necessity you must give yourself if you are not going to be cruel in the moments that you are subjugated. And so in a lot of ways, I believe that you are now, that we are now at war. There is a war that is happening online, and it is happening between the higher classes and the lower classes, and they are trying to get us to fist fight each other as much as possible, specifically because they are terrified the status quo is changing. And they want to be the first ones to pioneer the digital landscape, not knowing, not understanding that they could never have it all. But because of the tiny, minuscule, fragile lives that billionaires lead, that millionaires lead, these just wretched little lives, they think that the pull that they have and the reach that they have is enormous, because they can see from their infrastructural standpoint how wide it goes, but they don't even have the understanding to say that it's okay for them to let other people do it, because they couldn't actually ever do it all. It's like somebody saying that they were going to try to stop anybody from writing any new books so that they could finish reading all the ones that exist, not understanding that there's not enough lifetimes to be able to do so. And so therefore trying to stop that would be not only a waste of their own time and resources, but just the destruction of what potentially could be beautiful that they may yet still see in their lifetime. And that is a greater metaphorical description of what's happening to black people in the nation than anything else. Like they literally want to see you guys fail so that they can catch up with the hope of the white American dream that they want to be able to achieve. And they definitely do not want you getting there first.
I mean,
And
our
the thing is,
subjugation is
all of
part of the dream. You know, like if we're not subjugated, then the dream is dead. And so
well,
that's what we have to
it's
grapple with.
it's this wild thing where like they don't even realize how much they've sacrificed. And I've got friends now
That's the
who are
hardest
having
part.
kids and they don't want to. They do not want to have kids. These kids are assholes, and I don't mean say that like kids in the modern era are assholes. I mean, like these specific kids are assholes, but like these parents are just instructed to be so grateful that they have children that look like them, that act like them. And, whenever the kids act out and like break a whole bunch of shit, they're like, well, you know, he's a wild one, just like you. And it's like, yeah, no, it's because you're working 4 jobs and so is your wife. And so are your parents, and you're never going to catch up. I've got a friend that I can't hang out with anymore because he's become too racist. He's become too prejudiced. He winds up making bad jokes about how the woke left is ruining America and turning everybody into, these slugs of the mind. And meanwhile, he's like hardcore an advocate for his gay son. And it's like, this is the temperament of the fragile white, that they can't admit how bad they've got it. And if they know there's somebody within their life that they will need to show kindness to because of a certain thing, then what they'll do is, if that person has an out of bounds behavior mechanism, like you're not allowed to like, refer to gay people as fags, like they'll know that rule. And so instead, what they'll do is they'll pull the carpet out from under them concerning chores or hobbies or being late all the time, and making it so that that person's life is constantly disrupted and unstable. I found that with the modern age, we're seeing intelligent people coming forward from all channels. And instead of there being some sort of Jesus figure who's going to connect everyone, there's 1,000 Jesuses. There's 1,000 Marys. There's 1,000 Moses. There's 1,000 Mohammeds. There's 1,000 Siddharthas. We are the people who were hurt. We were the people who chose kindness and bravery and cheer, and we're rising up. And that there's going to be a astronomical number of us coming out of the woodwork to cheer each other on. And so there's not going to be one leader. There's not going to be one person who can consume it all, drink it all in, provide all the right answers. But there's going to be a lot of us who are going to try and get close. And together, if we can bring those people together, we can aid them in keeping up the efforts to do things like what you're doing. Just cheer people on. You have an open door policy that says if anybody wants to talk about this stuff, they can come in and hang. Well, who's knocking on your door? I guarantee Ben Shapiro doesn't have the stones to come on here and take a challenge with you. Those kinds of guys only ever pick fights that they know they can win. And when that's the case, you can also tell that that's a way that they're crying for help, because they don't even have the agency to know how delicious it is to get the shit kicked out of yourself to be wrong. And I think in a lot of ways, we're finding an entire group of people who are coming out of the pandemic, coming out of this age of mass shootings, coming out of an age of new terror, who are going, you know what? Honestly, it's going to be like rain on a duck's back, and I'm still going to keep quacking because the quacking's good. And the water just doesn't even, it's just always there. Daryl Davis, are you familiar with him?
Of course.
Terrific. He is a master tier social engineer. His skill at organization penetration is chef's kiss amazing. That guy and his ability to penetrate the KKK. To anybody who's listening, to anybody who's watching who doesn't know Daryl Davis, please go look him up. He did an incredible interview with what's his bucket? The bald guy that annoys everybody. I don't know, the fear show thing. Fuck, I just lost my train of thought with him. Anyway, Daryl Davis approached KKK members and convinced them to listen to jazz and party with him and give up their hoods. And he eventually had a collection of like something like 1,000 or more KKK members' hoods.
It was more like 70 something, but like yeah.
You sure?
I'm
almost
positive. Yeah.
Okay. Like I said, I don't mind being wrong. I do not mind being wrong, but I was under the impression it wound up growing to an absurd level.
No.
Okay, well, we're gonna have to fact check that one, but it's commendable, absolutely commendable. There was he said that it was more than he could possibly handle, and that he wound up repurposing them and turning them into other things. But that the way he did it was by getting them to have more fun with him than they were having at the Klan meetings.
I mean, I guess that was part of it, but you know,
That was it.
well,
That's it.
there's a lot more. You know, I have listened extensively to Daryl Davis talk about, you know, in explicit detail some of the conversations he had, how they went, the kind of relationship between his approach and why it went right versus how it could go wrong, how it almost went wrong. You know,
Yeah.
there's a lot there. You know, I think I'm not sure that that would cover it. You know, to say that they have more fun in one place than another. And we actually have a comment in the chat that I wanted to pose for you. We actually have an ex-Nazi skinhead in the chat, and they
Fantastic.
they
Welcome.
say as an ex-Nazi skinhead, well, we had quote fun. We just had fun that others had to pay for. So how do you respond
Indeed.
to that?
Indeed. And that's the point, is that when you consider the agency that you have to design and build fun, that's why you give it up, because you realize that for the exact same effort, you can literally do it in a way that doesn't cost other people. In fact, you can actually get them to be additive, bring them along, and have an even better time. That the party grows and that
Yeah,
the
but how
celebration.
do you get from A to B, right? Because like that choice is always available, right? Like, but how you know how do you get people to make the choice to want that? You know, like a lot of people are very comfortable in having fun at other people's expense. You know, they're comfortable because of the things that you listed, right? Their traumas, their you know, it's part of their coping mechanisms, or they've just never really introspected, or this and that. So, you know, how do we get someone from A to B?
You basically need to make up your mind whether or not you're going to do the work to go and get them. Are
Well, I
you
mean,
going
is
to?
it that simple, right? Even if you do the work to go and get them, right? You know, ultimately, your decision to go get people, that's not the end all be all. That's not what makes the difference. What makes the difference is people choosing to change, right? And so, like, you can create an environment. You know, you mentioned the environment. You could create an environment where it's more likely for people to choose the pathway that you're saying that you're laying out for people. And I think
Yeah,
that's the maximum that we can do, you know, as people outside of their internal struggle and internal
there's
decision making process.
there's a saying that you can't change people, and that saying is beholden to people who don't understand the agency that they have to be able to do so, because they don't actually know how to do it without hurting anyone.
Well,
And
I
as
do
a
it all the time
salesman,
without hurting anyone, but like my
yeah,
point is
but like
like I'm not really changing
being
them, right? That's that I want to get this at this point because I think it's important. As a teacher of
oh,
almost
you
two
are.
decades, right? Okay, so
Mhm.
like I mean, I've definitely influenced people, right? But like the influence that I had is I created an environment for them to change themselves. I'm certain that that is a more accurate way of describing it than saying that I changed them. And the reason why is because I literally catalyzed the moment of change. I've done it so many times, dozens of times, you know, that I can recount and analyze. And I'm telling you, in those moments, it's the reason it happens is not it's not totally divorced from what I've done, right? But enough that I wouldn't say that my influence, even if it did make the difference for the catalyzation of their change, I wouldn't necessarily describe my influence as being the reason for them change or me getting them to change. You know, they change because I watched them change. I watched them change themselves. So like, it just gives
Yeah,
them an opportunity to do it. You know?
this aspect of being a former ally to the subjugated who punch down within the organization. There is being an ally to people who are at the bottom punching up. There is being an ally to all sorts of different people, but at some point you do recognize your own agency to change yourself. And how is it that you change yourself? That prospect means that you can change other people. But the dilemma that we run into, especially having talked about missionaries and religions, is who gives that permission. And right now, The only people handing out permission to actually change people are people who are predatorily going after groups of people in order to reward themselves with their efforts. So what I'm saying is, you asked, what can we do? And what I'm saying is, someone like me has to show up at a place like this and tell all of you, you have permission to go change people, because I trust you and have faith in you that if you have come to this conclusion that we are in greater need than we possibly could even fathom as things are drifting apart, then I trust you with everything in my being that you will figure out a way to make it right. And that if you are okay with having regrets, if you can understand and stomach regrets and the strength that it takes to digest that and be wrong and then counter it, you're going to figure out how to do it right. And that influencing people has brought us to this point, but we are now at an intersection where you must be given permission to go full measure, that your capability to influence other people needs not just be that you will do what colonizers and the subjugators and the billionaires and the owners did. You must do brandlessly, for no good reason than the adjoinment of our species across the world, for no greater reason than that, than the enjoyment and fulfillment of our own lives and the agency that we can give to each other. That's it. It doesn't have some brand to go with it. You don't have to give me money. I'm not going to ask you for clout or any sort of like any sort of accolades or anything. You owe me nothing for your agency. And that message is the same message that religions and billionaires and politicians are selling. It's just that they do so with the expectation. They give you agency for a price. And as long as you're willing to pay that price, you can have more agency. But if you can't pay the price, then you need to be there for other people who are buying and selling agency within that system, to be able to punch down when it doesn't work for them, so that they don't wind up realizing that the system's actually rigged. So yeah, by all means, be the catalyst. I know exactly what you're talking about. For a long time, I went as nobody. I would meet people, I'd go to bars, I'd drink with them, and I'd talk to them about what they needed to do with their lives, listen to them, and have them tell me their stories. And what I found was this thing called the Jesus maneuver. If you are incredibly nice to people, cognitive dissonance happens to the people who are most subjugated, people who do not have the capacity to in any way build infrastructure for or aid their own agency to do things that they wish they could, that would fulfill them and heal them from the traumas that they are experiencing. And in trade for kindness as a stranger, if you are not asking for anything in return, they will give you their darkest secrets. They will tell you the things that they will tell no one. And at the doorstep of white culture in America, they told me what they were hurting from. They told me how their families treated each other. They told me how their bosses treated them. And I can tell you right now that they're getting the shit kicked out of them, and they just can't say it because they're afraid of what it may cost them to do so. So by all means, use both tools. Be a catalyst. Don't lean all the way into having to colonize the minds of other people that you need in order to change and bring things up. But there will be a necessity, because if you are at war culturally with a bunch of people that want things to go back to whatever it was that they were, that can't now possibly happen because that was before the internet, and the internet is the thing that will now perpetuate this new culture that they can't get rid of. They can't win, and they don't know it, and they need a hand to guide them. And so it goes from you going, hey, over here, to reaching into the thickness that they are still entrenched in and pulling them out. That's the difference between those two tools. That you can, on one hand,
we're gonna have to have a whole separate conversation about that, because that is, um, you know, yeah, I've got some qualms with it, and I agree.
well, I mean,
I agree with a lot of what you said, but I do have some qualms with it, and